I like digging into the story or the journey of pivoting to a different idea. I think as a founder, that's probably the most scarce thing I can imagine. But looking back, what kind of advice would you give to founders that have not experienced that yet, and sort of get them mentally ready to tackle that?
I think you don't want to pivot for the sake of pivot, and you want to make sure that the particular idea that you're pursuing does end up, that you've given it a fair shot, that you have tried everything, and then you have the right success criteria that you have defined. Because, before you hit the success point, you're inevitably going to have a bunch of disappointments to kind of deal with on your way to success. Um, the advice, so one, don't, if things aren't going well, ask yourself why, and don't just use pivot as a natural answer necessarily. But keeping that in mind, I think for us it was just about our ability to disconfirm our beliefs. Like we were really passionate about this idea, but we were vocally self-critical that we weren't getting the adoption that we expected us to be getting, and we weren't getting closer to getting that adoption. We weren't becoming the world's experts in the particular new field that we were in, despite working really, really hard for months in that particular field, while we were somewhat recognized in the distributed system space. And that made it that notion that we weren't getting better and that we weren't getting the set of expertise that we needed to really differentiate us from every other person in that space made it a little bit easier for us. So disconfirm your beliefs, set concrete criteria ahead of time, and then evaluate yourself against it, and then ask yourself why you're not meeting them.
Yeah, I really think that this idea of, whether it's a big pivot or mini pivots within a certain domain, because even within, enterprise SaaS, there's so many different things you can do. I really think that this idea of pivoting should get normalized, but it's not a rule of thumb by any means, right? So you got to give it sufficient time. You got to give it. So there's no silver bullet for like, oh, this is how long you try it before you pivot. Sometimes things take longer as long as you have a plan. But that concrete goal piece is actually really, really important. It's really important to set goals ahead of time, let's say a quarter in advance, and then not change your goal as you approach it. Because it can be really tempting to say, oh, but this happened, so we're going to push this back by 2 months, and we did this instead. I think it's important to remember that there was a deliberate decision to commit to a concrete set of goals. And of course, that process in the first place has to be a more rigorous and more well thought out process. And then you stick to your goals. And that's what we did. And when we evaluated it, just didn't hit the bars we had set for ourselves. So at that point, you have to be honest with, whether or not that is the thing. So for us, it was a natural conclusion, and I think for everyone else, each case is going to be unique and different. I think also just reaching out to the people that you trust, reaching out to our advisor and our mentor and investor network definitely helped a lot. We were starting to hear very similar advice across different people, so that told us that there was something there we should listen to.
What are the signs you feel at least convinced or committed to? Let's pivot. Can you take us back to that moment and share some of the early signs?
Yeah, I think for us, it was a little bit of failure as well, right? Like we weren't succeeding, and bluntly, we were failing. We failed to raise money. The many investors were very generous with their time. They would take our calls. They would hear our idea very politely, and they'll say, "Yep, we like the idea. We like you. You should do something different." And we didn't realize that investors are going to be taking meaningful risks on us. And founder market fit is actually a pretty good de-risking facility that investors really like, and for good reason. It's a rational thing. And it took us some time, but we eventually internalized that we're not the domain experts in this, and in some cases we learned that the investors knew more about the space than we did. And that's a bad sign, right? Like, that's a great thing for an entrepreneur if the investors know more about the domain than you do, but it's a really difficult position to put the investors in. And so that was one thing. The second thing was like the app that we were building. When we compared it against the state of the art versus what we had imagined, like we just weren't making as much progress. It didn't feel as different as, you know, our previous arrogant selves thought that we could make it. Like when we said we're going to come out and we're going to make this app that really gets people to start moving, being more active, and it just wasn't as effective as we thought it was going to be, and it didn't. So, you know, the investor signal, the fact that the app was failing even to move us, and then lastly, just going back full circle to the investors, every time when we would, this happened 90% of our investor calls, they would say, this is nice, not interested. If you do something in infrastructure space, just let us know. And so that some of them were just kind of just hinting, you know, you have this big opportunity, why aren't you taking it? And then one of the investors contacts that Daniela had actually gave us a pep talk on take the biggest swing you can take, find your unfair advantage. You are no different. You're no more uniquely qualified to do this than a random student at like Stanford, for instance. Like, what makes you uniquely qualified to do this particular consumer startup? And we couldn't answer this question. He asked us to answer this question on the spot, and we couldn't answer it. And then we thought about it, and we kept answering it to ourselves, and we were never happy with the answer we gave. And that, you know, so those were the kind of signals that led us to, all right, let's see what else we can be doing, and let's go back to our list and see what comes up.
And I think part of, in terms of a simple litmus test, is just do the pitch many, many times. I mean, by this point, our pitch looks nothing like what we started with in, you know, earlier this year when we pivoted. But you could tell the level of energy is really different as soon as we started pivoting to the new idea. You know, we would pitch to all the angel investors, the VCs, our advisors, our technical advisors, and I think we would watch each other and just notice that we have so much knowledge and so much confidence in the topic and the domain we're talking about, and we're able to. It's an infectious energy. We're able to inspire the people we're talking about it with. And it was just kind of, in a way, as we refined our pitch, it was night and day the kind of reactions we got, not just from an investment perspective, but from a perspective of, I believe in this idea, I believe in you guys, I want to help because this is starting to look like a rocket ship and everybody wants to be a part of that success. So we just started enlisting, I think. We started seeing people getting inspired. And that was it's kind of an obvious thing, but it can be hard to realize that you don't have that before you get there. And then once we got there, hindsight is 2020, and then of course we realized it was the right choice.